I was loading my Jeep for my yearly cabin trip when my daughter texted, "Dad, you're hosting Christmas dinner for 50. We already told everyone." No request, no apology, just a command. I stared at the message, then replied, "Then you'll need a caterer. I'll be at the cabin until December 23rd. At 6 a.m. the next morning, my son-in-law called furious because the caterer would not accept him as the owner of my house. But that was only the first crack in their plan. If you found your way here today, thank you more than I can say. Tell me in the comments, what city or country are you joining from? Knowing you are out there makes every story worth telling. This story includes fictional elements added for educational and entertainment purposes. Names and settings are imagined, but the lesson inside them belongs to all of us. My name is Stellan Voss. At 69, I have learned that the most dangerous messages never arrive with warning labels. They come while your hands are full, your back is turned, and your guard is somewhere else entirely. It was the 9th of December, a Tuesday, cold enough that my breath fogged in the garage. I was loading the last of my bags into the trunk of my Jeep Winter Gear coffee, 2 novels I probably wouldn't finish, and a bottle of scotch I definitely would. The plan was simple: drive up to my cabin in Truckee Stay until the 23rd, and spend 2 weeks being nobody's anything. I'd been doing that every December since Nora passed. The cabin was ours once. Now it was mine, which is a different thing entirely, and I'd learned to live inside that difference the way you learn to live with a bad knee, carefully, and without making too much of a fuss about it. My phone buzzed on the hood of the Jeep. I almost didn't check it. Almost. The message was from my daughter Claudia. No greeting, no question mark. No softening of any kind. Just a single line delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had already decided the conversation was over before it began. "Dad, you're hosting Christmas dinner for 50. We already told everyone. December 24th. The house is perfect for it." I read it once. Then I read it again, slower, the way you reread a document, when you're sure you must have missed something. A caveat, a question, anything that resembled an ask rather than an order. There was nothing. 50 people. My house. My 2 hands. My kitchen. Not a single syllable that sounded like "would you" or "could you" or even "we were thinking." Just a declaration, clean and confident the way Claudia had always operated. Move the pieces, first explain the board later, and count on the other person to catch up. I set the phone down on the hood and looked at my own reflection in the driver's side window. A tall man, gray at the temples, still broad in the shoulders from years of early mornings that had nothing to do with the gym. A man who had built something real from nothing, who had buried the person he loved most in this world, who had spent the better part of 3 years quietly becoming invisible to the people who shared his last name. The cold bit at my knuckles. Inside the house, the Christmas decorations I hadn't put up yet sat in their boxes in the hall closet, the red and gold ornaments Nora had chosen one by one over 30 years. I'd told myself I'd get to them. I hadn't. I picked up the phone. I typed slowly, deliberately, the way a man does when he wants every word to carry its full weight. "Then you'll need a caterer. I'll be at the cabin until the 23rd. Send." I tucked the phone into my coat pocket, closed the trunk, and walked around to the driver's side. The garage smelled like motor oil and cedar, the cedar from a stack of firewood I kept near the door, the same wood Nora used to say made the whole place smell like a lodge. I climbed in, started the engine, and let it warm up for a minute. The phone rang. Claudia's name lit up the screen. I looked at it. The call rang 4 times, 5, 6. I watched it the way you watch weather moving in from the west, aware of it, measuring it, not yet deciding what to do. On the 8th ring, I backed out of the garage, turned onto the road, and let it go to voicemail. There are conversations that need the right moment. That particular conversation needed more than a moment. It needed the truth, and the truth wasn't something I was ready to hand her through a car speaker on a Tuesday morning while she was still sure she'd already won. The subdivision fell away behind me. The lake appeared on my left, steel gray and flat, under the December sky. I had been looking at that lake from this driveway for 31 years, and it had never once looked the same twice. Today it looked patient, still, like something that had seen a great deal and wasn't surprised by any of it. A second call came in as I reached the intersection. I let that one go too. By the time I hit the freeway heading west, the phone had gone quiet. Claudia would interpret that silence as surrender, as the first sign that her father had folded, the way he always folded, smoothed things over, taken the path of least resistance. She had always underestimated what quiet men do when they stop talking. I rolled the window down an inch. The air off the Sierra Nevada was clean and cold and smelled like pine and high altitude, and the particular kind of freedom that only exists at elevation. My chest loosened a little, not because the problem had gone away, but because I had remembered somewhere between the driveway and the on-ramp exactly who I was. The drive from Lake Tahoe to Truckee takes an hour and 20 minutes on a good day. Longer in December when the passes ice over and the Sierra Nevada reminds you that it was here long before the highways and will be here long after. I know every mile of that road. I have driven it in grief, in joy, in the particular numb silence that follows a funeral, and in the ordinary quiet of a Tuesday afternoon when nothing has happened yet. That Tuesday I drove it remembering. There is a stretch just past Kingsbury Grade, where the trees fall away and the whole valley opens up below you, white and still and enormous, the kind of view that makes your chest do something you can't quite name. I always slow down there, every single time without deciding to. Nora used to call me on it. "You're doing it again," she'd say, bracing one hand lightly on the dashboard, even though we weren't going fast enough to need it. "You slow down at the same spot every time we make this drive. It's worth slowing down for, Stellan." She'd turn to look at me with those gray eyes that never once told me a comfortable lie. "You've seen that view 300 times. 301 now." She'd laugh, a real laugh, not polite, the kind that started low in her chest and meant she actually thought something was funny. "You are the most stubborn, sentimental man I have ever met. You married me." "I did," she'd say, settling back into her seat. Still trying to figure out what that says about me, I slowed down at that stretch. Same as always. The valley spread out below me, clean and white and indifferent, and Nora's voice was so clear in my head that for a half-second I reached toward the passenger seat out of pure muscle memory before my hand found nothing but empty air and cold leather. 3 years. You'd think a man would stop doing that by now. I first met Nora when I was 41 years old, and she walked into my office in Reno representing a client on the other side of a deal I was putting together. I had built Voss Capital from a single rented room above a dry cleaner on Virginia Street, $400 a legal pad full of plans, and the kind of stubbornness that either builds something or breaks you with very little in between. By the time Nora walked through my door, the firm was real. The office had windows that didn't rattle. The coffee maker worked without being kicked. She sat down across from me, opened her briefcase, and in under 5 minutes had dismantled 2 of my strongest arguments with the calm efficiency of someone who had been underestimating herself by accident her whole career. I stared at her for a moment. Then I said, "How fast can you start?" She looked up from her notes. "Excuse me. I'm offering you a job. Name your number." She closed the briefcase with a soft click. "Mr. Voss, I'm currently working against you. I know. That's why I want you on my side." She studied me for a long moment, the kind of look that takes inventory without making you feel like merchandise. Then she said, "I'll think about it," picked up her briefcase and walked out. She turned down the job. She agreed to dinner instead, which turned out to be the better offer for everyone involved. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony in Tahoe City, just the 2 of us and a judge and Nora's sister, who cried harder than either of us. Nora wore a blue dress the color of the lake in August. I wore the only good suit I owned and forgot half my vows because she was looking at me in a way that made it genuinely difficult to remember my own name. For 24 years, she was the smartest person in every room we entered together. Not the loudest, never the loudest, but the sharpest. She read people the way other people read weather. She saw things coming before they arrived, and she told me the truth about them even when I didn't want to hear it. She told me the truth about Claudia. It was the summer after Claudia married Beckett Hargrove, a man whose handshake was too firm and whose eye contact lasted about 3 seconds longer than comfortable. We were sitting on the back deck of the Lake Tahoe house, late evening wine opened the lake going dark below us. "I need to say something," Nora said, "and I need you to actually hear it." "I always hear you." "You listen," she said. "Hearing is different." She turned her glass slowly in her hands. "Claudia loves you, Stellan. I believe that. But the way she loves you, it's tangled up with what you've built, with what you represent, with Voss Capital and the house and the name. Separate those things out and I'm not sure what's left." My jaw tightened. "She's our daughter." "She is. And I'm not saying she's a bad person." Nora's voice was steady, careful, the way it got when she was choosing every word. "I'm saying she married a man who is very good at spending money he doesn't have. And that combination, her ambition and his desperation, that's a door you want to keep locked." "Nora, Beckett asked me 3 questions at the rehearsal dinner," she said. "All 3 were about the trust structure of the firm. Not about you, not about us. About the legal architecture of your assets." She looked at me. He thought I didn't notice. I didn't say anything. My chest felt tight the way it gets when someone hands you a truth you've been actively avoiding. "I could be wrong," she said quietly. "I hope I'm wrong. But if I'm not—" She stopped, set her glass down on the armrest with a small, deliberate click. "I want you to be protected, Stellan. Promise me you'll let me make sure of that." "You're not going anywhere," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. She looked at me for a long moment, and something moved behind her eyes. Something I didn't understand. Then something that only made sense much later. "Promise me anyway," she said. "I promise." She reached over and put her hand over mine on the armrest. We sat like that until the lake went fully dark, and the first stars came out over the ridge. 8 months later, she got the diagnosis. I pulled into the gravel drive of the cabin and cut the engine. The pines stood tall and dark all around, and the air coming through the cracked window smelled like snow and cold stone, and the particular silence that only exists at elevation. Everything was exactly as I'd left it in October. The same worn welcome mat, the same weather vane Nora had insisted on buying at a roadside stand in Nevada City because she said it looked like it had stories. In the front closet on the top shelf was a cedar box she had left here the last fall she was strong enough to make the drive. She'd carried it in herself, set it on the shelf herself, and told me herself that I should open it when I felt like I needed to. "How will I know when that is?" I'd asked her. She'd given me one of those looks, the inventory kind, the kind that saw straight through the question to whatever was underneath it. "You'll know," she said simply. And then she'd gone back out to the car for the rest of the bags, leaving me standing in the hallway with nothing to say. 3 years. I had walked past that closet door hundreds of times. I sat in the Jeep for another minute, engine ticking cold, creeping in through the windows. Claudia's message was still on my phone. The drive had given me distance from it, but not clarity, or maybe it had given me too much clarity, the uncomfortable kind that shows you a shape you've been looking away from for a long time. Nora had seen it. She'd told me. She'd asked me to promise. And before she left, she'd put something on that shelf for me to find. I climbed out of the Jeep and pulled my bag from the trunk. The cabin door unlocked on the first try, same as always. The interior was cold and dark and smelled like cedar and old coffee and the faint trace of a wood fire from 6 weeks ago. I set my bag down just inside the door, stood there in the dark for a moment. Then I walked to the closet, reached up to the top shelf, and wrapped both hands around the cedar box. I had just set the last bag down on the kitchen counter when my phone rang. The cabin kitchen was small and cold. The kind of cold that settles into a building after 6 weeks of nobody living in it. The kind that takes an hour of the heater running before you stop seeing your own breath. I had the burner going under a pot of water for coffee, my coat still on my gloves, stuffed into my pockets, when Lorraine's name lit up the screen. My younger sister. 65 years old, silver-haired, soft-spoken in the particular way of people who have learned that soft voices carry further than loud ones. We had grown up in the same house in Minnesota, shared the same dinner table, the same second-hand winter coats. I knew her the way you know the weather, in a place you've lived your whole life thoroughly, and with very few surprises. Or so I had thought. I answered on the third ring. Stellan. Her voice came through warm and careful the way it gets when she wants something, and has decided warmth is the fastest road to it. How was the drive up? The passes weren't too bad. Roads were fine, I said. What's on your mind, Lorraine? A small laugh practiced fond. Can't a sister just call to check in? You can, I said. And you usually do it on Sundays. It's Tuesday. A beat of quiet. Then she shifted gears the way I'd seen her do my whole life smoothly, without acknowledging the gear change. We've all been worried about you, Stellan. You've seemed so, I don't know, forgetful lately, distant, out there at that cabin all by yourself. My hand tightened around the phone. Not from anger, not yet. From recognition. That word. Forgetful. I had heard it before in other mouths in other contexts. But coming from Lorraine tonight, less than 4 hours after Claudia's message, it landed differently than it should have. Forgetful, I repeated. We all get that way. She said quickly, her voice dropping into something softer, more sorrowful. It's nothing to be ashamed of, sweetheart. It's just a lot of house for one man to manage. A lot of responsibility. And with the holidays coming, Lorraine, I kept my voice even. How do you know the dinner is for 50 people? The line went quiet, not a long quiet. Maybe 2 seconds. But I have spent 40 years in boardrooms where 2 seconds of silence can tell you everything a person doesn't want to say out loud. And those 2 seconds told me plenty. Claudia mentioned it, she said. Too fast. Slightly too casual the way a person sounds when they've prepared an answer, but hoped they wouldn't need it. We talk obviously. You know how close we are. When did she mention it? I don't remember exactly. Recently. Stellan. Why does that matter? I only got her message this morning, I said. A few hours ago. Another pause. Shorter this time, but I caught the edge of it. Well, maybe she told me last week. Or she was planning it and mentioned it ahead of time. I really don't. Stellan, the point is that we're all worried about you. Claudia loves you. I love you. We just want to make sure you're being taken care of. Taken care of, I said slowly. Yes. Her voice warmed again, rushing to fill the space. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. You don't have to manage that big house, all those financial things, Voss Capital, the property taxes, all of it. You've worked so hard your whole life. You deserve to rest. To let the people who love you handle things. My jaw tightened. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the tree-lined black shapes against a dark blue sky, snow heavy on the branches. The world outside the cabin utterly still. The coffee water was starting to steam. Lorraine, I said, what exactly are you suggesting I let people handle? Just everything. The house, the finances. A careful breath. Claudia and Beckett are there. They know the property. They've been managing it really for the past few years. It would be so much simpler. Simpler for who? The warmth in her voice flickered just for a fraction of a second, like a candle in a draft. For you, Stellan. For your peace of mind. My peace of mind is fine, I said. My memory is fine. My judgment is fine. I am 69 years old, not 99, and I ran a $48 million investment fund until 4 years ago. I think I can manage a property tax. Nobody's questioning your... Lorraine. My voice came out harder than I intended, and I let it. You used the word forgetful. You used the word confused. Those are very specific words. Where did you hear them? The line went so quiet I could hear the faint hiss of static. I'm just worried about my brother, she said finally. Her voice had changed. The warmth was still there, but underneath it something had shifted, pulled back, recalibrated. That's all this is. I'm your family. You are, I said. Good night, Lorraine. I ended the call before she could answer. The kitchen was quiet, except for the low rumble of the heater and the soft roll of the water beginning to boil. I set the phone face down on the counter and pressed both palms flat against the cold tile and let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Forgetful. Confused. Let the people who love you handle things. Those were not words Lorraine had invented on her own. I knew my sister. She was not a woman who strategized alone. She was a woman who took instructions well and delivered them convincingly. Someone had given her those words. Someone had rehearsed them with her. And that someone had known about the dinner for 50 people before I had gotten off the freeway. The water boiled. I poured it over the grounds and watched the dark bloom spread through the filter, and I thought about the fact that this phone call had come within hours of Claudia's message. Not days. Hours. That kind of coordination does not happen by accident. I carried my coffee to the window and looked out at the dark pines and the black sky above them scattered with cold December stars. My chest felt heavy in a way that had nothing to do with altitude, the particular heaviness of a man who has just understood something he would have preferred not to understand. This was not about a Christmas dinner. This had been in motion for a long time. Long enough for Lorraine to have her lines ready. Long enough for the word confused to feel natural in her mouth. I drank my coffee standing at that window for a long time, watching the stars and turning the question over in my mind, not what was happening, because that was becoming clear enough to make my stomach hurt. But when? When had it started? How far back did it go, and what exactly had Nora known? Sleep did not come. I lay in the dark for an hour, staring at the ceiling of the cabin bedroom, listening to the wind move through the pines outside, and the occasional creak of the old building settling into the cold. The heater ticked. The clock on the nightstand read 11:47. My mind would not stop turning over Lorraine's voice, the 2-second pause, the particular smoothness of a prepared answer being delivered just slightly too fast. At 10 past midnight, I got up. The cabin was dark, except for the low orange glow of the fireplace embers in the main room. I pulled on my flannel robe and padded down the short hallway to the front closet. The floorboards were cold even through my socks. I reached up to the top shelf without turning on a light. I knew exactly where the cedar box was. I had walked past it hundreds of times in 3 years. I had never once let my hands linger on it. I lifted it down now. It was lighter than I remembered, or maybe heavier. It is hard to say when the weight you are really feeling has nothing to do with wood. I carried it to the armchair by the fireplace, the one with the worn left armrest where Nora used to rest her elbow when she read. I sat down, set the box on my knees, and looked at it for a moment in the dim orange light. Cedar. Smooth-grained, hand-finished with a small brass latch that had gone soft with age. Nora had bought it at a woodworker's market in Carmel, maybe 20 years ago. She'd carried it home wrapped in newspaper in the back of the car and set it on her dresser, and I'd teased her about it. "You paid $200 for a box," I'd said. "I paid $200 for something made by someone's hands," she'd said, running her thumb along the grain. "There's a difference. What are you going to put in it?" She'd looked at me with that small private smile, the one she kept for moments when she was thinking something she hadn't decided to share yet. Things worth keeping. I unlatched the brass clasp. The cedar smell hit me first, rich and warm, and so entirely her that my throat closed without warning, and my eyes burned before I'd even looked at what was inside. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and held it there for a moment, breathing through my nose, waiting for the wave to pass. It passed. I looked. On top was our wedding photograph. Not a framed copy, the actual original print, the one the photographer had given us, slightly larger than standard, the corners gone soft and curved with age. Nora in blue. Me in the only good suit I owned. The judge was saying something, and we were both looking at each other instead of at him, and whatever expression was on my face in that photograph, I could not describe it now except to say that I have never looked that way since, and I know I never will again. My hand shook as I set it carefully on the armrest beside me. Beneath the photograph, the brass key to the first Voss Capital office on Virginia Street in Reno. Dull, now scratched, no longer useful for anything. I had forgotten Nora had taken it when we moved to larger offices. I closed my fingers around it, and the cold metal bit into my palm. Below that, a folded cocktail napkin from a restaurant in San Francisco we had gone to for our 20th anniversary. Nora had written something on it, in her small, even handwriting, a line from a poem, something about how the best love is the kind that makes you more yourself, not less. I had not read that napkin in years, and could not read it now because my eyes had gone too blurry, and I was not going to cry. I absolutely was not going to sit alone in this dark cabin at midnight and fall apart. I was 69 years old, and I had survived things that would have broken lesser men. I pressed my thumb hard against the bridge of my nose and took 3 long, slow breaths. Then I looked at what was underneath the napkin, a plain white envelope, sealed. My name written on the front in Nora's handwriting, not printed, written the way she signed things she meant to last. And beneath my name in smaller letters, 2 lines. File 24. Silas has the rest. Open this when you need to, not before. Silas. Silas Merritt, our attorney of 25 years, the man who had drafted every significant legal document in our life together, who had sat at our kitchen table so many times he knew where we kept the good coffee. Nora had always trusted Silas with the things that mattered most. I turned the envelope over in my hands. It was thicker than I expected, not a single sheet more, like 5 or 6 pages folded together. The seal was intact. The flap was pressed down with the clean, deliberate finality of someone who had thought carefully about the act of sealing it. I held it for a long time, that envelope. Part of me wanted to tear it open right there, needed to. The same way you need to press on a bruise even though you know it will hurt. But something else held me back. Not fear, exactly. More like the understanding that whatever was inside had been put there for a reason, and the reason had a timing to it that Nora had considered carefully enough to write it on the outside when you need to, not before. Did I need to, right now, midnight, the night of a rude text message and a rehearsed phone call from my sister? I set the envelope on top of the wedding photograph on the armrest. I looked at Nora's handwriting in the low firelight, the careful loops of the S, the clean upright of the I, the way she always pressed slightly harder on the last letter of a word, as if making sure it landed. "What did you know?" I said out loud into the dark, quiet room. The fire did not answer. The pines outside shifted in the wind. The clock ticked toward 1 in the morning. But here is what I understood, sitting in that armchair with a cedar box open on my lap, and Nora's handwriting reading itself at me in the dark. She had not left that envelope by accident. She had not labeled it casually. She had known, with the particular precision that had made her the best attorney I ever met, that a day would come when I would be sitting somewhere very much like this place, holding something very much like this envelope, needing something she had thought to give me before she left. She had been preparing for this moment, while she was still here to prepare for it. My chest ached so deep I could not tell if it was grief or something closer to gratitude. I placed everything carefully back in the box, the photograph, the key, the napkin, the envelope, and closed the brass latch with a soft click. I set the box on the side table next to my wedding ring, which I had never stopped wearing. I pulled the blanket from the back of the chair around my shoulders and looked at the dying embers of the fire. I did not sleep. But I sat there until the last of the embers went gray, and somewhere in that long, cold, quiet hour, something in me stopped feeling afraid. The eastern ridge was just beginning to go pale when the phone rang. I was still in the armchair. The fire had been cold for hours, the embers nothing but gray ash and silence, and the cabin had settled into that particular pre-dawn stillness, where the darkness outside the windows looks less like night and more like the world holding its breath. My coffee was long finished. The cedar box sat on the side table where I had left it, closed the brass latch, catching what little light came through the window. I had been sitting there thinking. Just thinking, the long, slow turning over kind that you only do in the hours before sunrise when there is nothing left to distract you from yourself. The phone lit up at 6:02. Beckett Hargrove. I picked it up on the second ring. "What did you do?" His voice came through stripped of every layer of polish he usually wore like a second skin, tight-clipped, the words pushed out through clenched teeth. "The caterer won't confirm the booking. They keep asking who owns the property." "Why are they asking me that, Stellan?" I looked out at the ridge going slowly from black to deep gray to the first thin bruise of morning light. "Good morning, Beckett." "Don't." A sharp, controlled exhale. "I have been on the phone with these people since last night. They took the guest count, they took the menu selections, and then they come back saying they need some kind of owner authorization before they'll process the deposit. I called it in under my name. I gave them the address. Why is your name coming up?" Large private events at a residential property require the owner of record to sign a liability release before the booking is confirmed. I said, keeping my voice as level and unhurried as a man discussing the weather. "It protects the catering company if anything goes wrong on the property during the event. It is completely standard in high-end catering contracts." A beat of furious quiet. "Then how do you know that—" "I have attended a great many events over the years," I said. "Well, it's unnecessary." His voice climbed half a register. "You know this house. You know we've been taking care of it. Just call them and tell them it's fine. Tell them you authorize it. That's all this needs to be." "I'm at the cabin until the 23rd, I said. That's what I told Claudia. "Stellan." The Polish cracked clean down the middle. Underneath it was something raw, not anger, exactly more like the sound a man makes when a plan he has been building for a long time starts showing its first crack. "Come on. It's Christmas. The family is expecting this. Claudia has put weeks into organizing it. All you have to do is pick up the phone and make this go away." "Then it sounds like a very simple phone call for you to make," I said. "It's not, they won't." He stopped. Collected himself. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped lower, gone quieter, almost reasonable the way a man goes quiet when he has decided to try a different angle. "Stellan, this is our house, basically. We've been living there, managing the property, keeping the place running while you've been up at that cabin. We've put years into it. The least you could do is—" "Is it?" I said. He stopped mid-sentence. 2 words. That was all. No heat in them, no edge, no accusation. Just a question I set down between us with the careful deliberateness of a man who has placed things on tables for 40 years and knows exactly what happens when the right object lands in the right spot. "Is it our house?" I said again, same tone, same quiet. You know what I mean." His voice had changed again, uncertain now, wrong-footed the way a man sounds when a conversation has gone somewhere he did not plan for. "I just meant we've been present. We've been there. We've invested ourselves in that place while you—" "I've been here," I said, "at my cabin, on my property, resting, which is what I told everyone I intended to do." I let that sit for exactly 1 second, Tell Claudia I'll be home on the 23rd as promised. Enjoy your Wednesday, Beckett. I ended the call. My hands were steady, completely, entirely steady, the way they had been in every negotiation that mattered every moment when the other side of the table expected me to flinch. I set the phone face up on the side table next to the cedar box and looked at it. Basically, our house. That word was doing a tremendous amount of work in that sentence, and Beckett did not even know it. Basically meaning not legally, not on any document, not in the records of any county office in the state of Nevada. Basically meaning in the story we have been telling ourselves in the world, as we have decided it ought to be, regardless of what the paperwork says. I had heard that word used that way before. In boardrooms and mediations, in the particular conversations that happen when someone has already decided they have won and is simply irritated that the other party has not yet agreed to lose. It never ended the way those people expected. My jaw was tight. I made myself unclench it. What bothered me most was not the arrogance of it. I had dealt with arrogance my whole career and learned to treat it as information rather than insult. What bothered me was the timeline. Beckett had been on the phone with the caterer since last night. The dinner was still 2 weeks away. Normal people do not panic about event logistics 14 days out at 6 in the morning. People who are running out of time do. I thought about Lorraine's rehearsed words. I thought about Claudia's message we already told everyone delivered like a verdict rather than an invitation. I thought about the Fong Bi inside the cedar box, Nora's handwriting. 24, Silas has the rest. There was something underneath all of this that I had not seen yet. Something with a deadline attached to it. Something that made 50 people at a Christmas dinner feel less like a celebration and more like a mechanism. I did not have the shape of it yet. But I had learned over 69 years and 4 decades of business that when people start rushing, they start revealing. And someone was about to reveal something. I picked up my coffee cup, found it empty, and went to make a fresh pot. The answer came at 8:42, and it came from a direction I had not seen coming at all. The coffee was fresh and hot, and I was on my second cup when the phone rang again at 8:42. I looked at the screen. A number I had not seen in several months, but knew, without having to think about it, the way you know the voice of someone you have worked alongside long enough to trust. Conrad Hale. 61 years old, built like a man who had spent 20 years on his feet in commercial kitchens before he figured out that the real money was in running them rather than working them. We had met at a Chamber of Commerce dinner in South Lake Tahoe 14 years ago. He had been catering the event I had been attending it, and we had ended up talking for 2 hours in a corner about the economics of the hospitality industry, while the rest of the room networked around us. We had stayed in each other's orbit ever since. He ran the most respected catering operation between Reno and the California border. If you wanted an event done correctly in this part of the country, not just fed, not just decorated, but actually done with the kind of precision that makes guests feel like they are the only people in the world, you called Conrad Hale. I answered on the second ring. Conrad, what brings you to my Wednesday morning? Stellan. His voice carried the particular careful weight of a man who has thought about exactly what he is going to say before picking up the phone. I'm sorry to call during your cabin time. I know what December means to you up there. Don't apologize. What's going on? A brief pause, not evasive, more like a man making sure he has his footing. A man called my office yesterday afternoon. Said his name was Beckett Hargrove. Wanted to book a 50-cover Christmas dinner for the 24th of December. Another pause. At your address, Stellan. Your house on the lake. I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter. The ceramic made a small, clean sound against the tile that seemed louder than it should have. He listed himself as the property owner on the intake form, Conrad continued. Standard procedure for us on any private residence event over 20 covers. We pull the county assessor's record to verify ownership before we process a deposit. protects us from liability situations. We have had people try to book events at properties they do not actually control, and when something damages the place or a guest gets hurt, he cleared his throat. You understand. I understand completely, I said. What did the record show? Your name, Stellan Voss, sole owner of record. A beat. Not Beckett Hargrove, not Claudia Voss Hargrove. You. I moved to the kitchen table and sat down. My chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with the altitude. What did Beckett say when your office flagged the mismatch? I asked. Conrad exhaled slowly. This is the part I called to tell you personally. When my coordinator explained that we needed the owner of record to authorize the event, before we could confirm, Mr. Hargrove became agitated, is the polite word. He told her the property was essentially yours in name only, that you had handed day-to-day management to him and Claudia, and that you were... Conrad stopped. Started again. Stellan, his exact words on a recorded line, were that you were getting confused about what belongs to you these days. The words hit me somewhere behind the sternum. Not a sharp pain, more like a deep pressure. The kind that tells you something important has just shifted. He said that, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He said exactly that. Conrad's voice dropped the professional register entirely and became simply the voice of a man talking to a friend. My coordinator is 26 years old, and she did not know who you were. She wrote it in the intake notes. I pulled the call recording myself when she flagged it for review, and I heard it with my own ears, and I want you to know that I put that booking on hold the moment I finished listening. My hand was pressed flat against the kitchen table. I could feel the grain of the wood through my palm, solid and real, and exactly where it had always been. Conrad, I said, how many people do you think he told that to? A silence on the line, thoughtful, not uncomfortable. That's a question I asked myself after I hung up with him, Conrad said. A man who says something like that to a stranger's intake coordinator says it because it comes easily, because he has said it before. His voice was careful now, deliberate. I do not think this was the first time those words came out of his mouth. My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my temples. There is one more thing, Conrad said. When my coordinator initially pushed back on the ownership question, Beckett pivoted. He started asking about, and I'm reading from her notes here, the extent of your investment holdings, whether Voss Capital was still active, whether the firm's assets were still tied to you personally or had been moved into other structures. A pause that felt careful and deliberate. She told him that was outside the scope of a catering inquiry. He did not push further, but she noted it. The kitchen felt very still. Outside the window, the snow under the pines was unmarked and white and perfectly undisturbed. Voss Capital. The fund I had spent 30 years building $48 million of carefully managed investment assets, a structure that Nora and I had spent years designing to outlast us both. Beckett had been asking about it to a catering coordinator on a recorded intake call. That was not curiosity. That was reconnaissance. Hold the booking, I said. My voice had gone quieter than I intended, the way it does when something large and cold settles into the center of your thinking. Do not confirm anything. Do not cancel, either just hold it. And Conrad, do not tell anyone you called me. Already decided that before I dialed, he said. Stellan, are you all right? I looked at the cedar box on the side table across the room. File 24. Silas has the rest. I'm getting there, I said. Thank you for this, truly. 15 years, Conrad said simply. You'd have done the same. I ended the call and sat at that kitchen table for a long moment, both hands flat on the wood, looking at nothing in particular and seeing everything very clearly. This was not about a Christmas dinner. It had never been about a Christmas dinner. 50 guests. A catering company asked about investment assets on an intake call. The word confused deployed like a prepared statement. And somewhere underneath all of it, a timeline, a urgency, a pressure that was building toward a specific date for a specific reason I had not yet fully seen. My eyes moved back to the cedar box. Nora had known something. She had known it long enough to prepare for it, to seal it in an envelope, to hand it to a lawyer with instructions. And I had been sitting on that knowledge for 3 years because I had not wanted to need it. I stood up from the table. My legs felt steadier than I expected. It was time to call Silas Merritt. By mid-afternoon, the snow had started again, coming down in thick, unhurried flakes that settled against the cabin windows and turned the tree line outside into something soft and gray and indistinct. I had been at the small desk in the corner since noon, working through a stack of Voss Capital quarterly reports I had brought up in September, cross-checking figures, the way a man does when he has started to suspect that the ground beneath him is not quite as solid as it looked. I was on the 3rd report when the email notification appeared on my laptop screen. An anonymous address, a long string of random letters and numbers, the kind you generate in 30 seconds when you do not want to be traced. Subject line, "Please read this." I opened it. The message was short. Rough around the edges, typed fast, the words slightly uneven, in a way that suggested the person writing them was not entirely steady. A transcript, a conversation between Claudia and Beckett, overheard and written down as quickly as possible before the details could slip away. After the toast, Lorraine opens first. Concerned, gentle. She knows what to say. And if he pushes back, he won't. Not in front of 50 people. He hates scenes, always has. We just need him in that room surrounded with the papers in front of him. What about Silas? He hasn't called Silas. He never does anything until it's too late. That's been true his entire life. And below the transcript, 7 words in lowercase, no punctuation typed, like a breath held too long, finally released. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. Please be careful." My throat locked up so fast and so completely that I pushed back from the desk and stood up because sitting felt suddenly impossible. I pressed both fists against the desk surface and leaned on them and stared at that word. Grandpa, 16 years old. My grandson had heard this, had sat with it, had made a decision that cost him something, and had found a way to get it to me. My eyes burned hot, and I pressed the heel of my hand hard against them and held it there. Then I picked up the phone and called Conrad Hale. He answered on the first ring. "Stellan, I didn't expect to hear back so soon. I need to ask you something," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "When Beckett called your office, the full conversation, not just what you told me this morning, I need everything." A pause. Then Conrad exhaled slowly. "I was going to call you again anyway. There were things I held back this morning because I wasn't sure how much you needed to hear at once." "Tell me now," I said. "All of it." "All right." I heard him move, the sound of a door closing, footsteps, the particular quiet of a man stepping somewhere private. When Beckett first called, he was smooth about it. Charming even. Said he was organizing a family Christmas gathering, gave the guest count, discussed the menu. All very normal. My coordinator had no reason to flag anything. But she did. She did because of the property ownership question. When she asked him to confirm ownership of the residence for the liability release, he went from smooth to sharp in about 4 seconds flat. Conrad's voice tightened. He said, and I'm going from memory here, but I've listened to this recording twice, he said, "The property is effectively ours. My father-in-law has been stepping back from everything for the past couple of years. He gets turned around about what belongs to him. We manage all of it now." My jaw clenched so hard I felt it in my back teeth. "Turned around," I repeated. "Turned around," Conrad confirmed. "Then your coordinator asked for documentation, deed, power of attorney, anything that established his authority over the property. And that's when he pivoted. To Voss Capital. To Voss Capital," Conrad said. "He asked whether the firm's assets were still held in your name personally, or whether they had been restructured into a trust or a partnership. He asked whether there was an active power of attorney on record with the firm. He asked. Conrad stopped. Stellan, he asked whether you had any cognitive evaluation on file with your physician. The room felt like it had gotten smaller. I walked to the window and stood there looking out at the snow falling on the pines, pressing my free hand flat against the cold glass. He asked about a cognitive evaluation, I said. On a catering intake call, Conrad said, and the disgust in his voice was quiet and controlled and entirely genuine. My coordinator told him those questions were outside the scope of our services and ended the call. She flagged it for me immediately. That's when I pulled the recording. Conrad. My voice had dropped to something I barely recognized, low, measured the voice I used in the worst negotiations, the ones where everything depended on not showing what you were actually feeling. How long do you think this has been in motion? Based on how rehearsed he sounded. Conrad did not hesitate. Months, at minimum. A man does not ask a catering company about cognitive evaluations unless someone has coached him on exactly what language builds a paper trail for a competency challenge. The words competency challenge landed like a stone dropped into still water. The impact small, the ripples spreading outward in every direction. A competency challenge. Under Nevada law, if a family member could demonstrate that a person lacked the mental capacity to manage their own affairs, a court could appoint a guardian or conservator to take control of that person's finances and property. It required documentation. It required witnesses. It required a pattern of behavior that could be presented to a judge as evidence of decline. It required, for example, a recording of a catering company's intake call, where the subject's own son-in-law described him as turned around and getting confused about what belongs to him. Conrad, I said, I need you to do something for me. Name it. Keep that recording. Do not delete it. Do not archive it anywhere it could be accidentally overwritten. Keep a copy somewhere outside your normal system. A beat of quiet. Then, already done. I made 2 copies this afternoon after we spoke. One on my personal drive, one with my attorney. Something in my chest loosened, not much, but enough to breathe around. Thank you. Stellan. Conrad's voice shifted, dropped the business register entirely. Are you going to be all right? I'm going to be better than all right, I said. I just needed to understand the full shape of it. You've got a shape now. I've got enough, I said. I'll call you before the 23rd. I ended the call and stood at the window for another moment, looking at the snow and letting everything Conrad had told me settle into place alongside the email on my screen, alongside Lorraine's rehearsed words, alongside Beckett's crack of a voice at 6 in the morning, saying basically, our house. Competency challenge. 50 witnesses, papers in front of me while the story did the heavy lifting. It was a real plan. A legal strategy, not just a family argument. Someone had done research. Someone had understood that the cleanest way to access $48 million in managed assets was not to steal them, it was to have a court decide that the man controlling them was no longer fit to do so, and that someone had been building the case piece by careful piece for longer than I had wanted to admit. I walked back to the desk, printed the email, folded it, put it in the drawer under the legal pad. Then I reached for the phone to call Silas. It rang in my hand before I could dial, Claudia's name on the screen. I looked at it for exactly 2 seconds, counted them, felt them, then turned the phone face down on the desk. Not tonight. Tomorrow morning with Silas on the line and the full shape of what Nora had left me open in front of me, I would know everything I needed to know before I spoke to Claudia again. Tonight I had heard enough. Claudia did not try to call again that night. I had half expected her to. She was not a woman who accepted unanswered calls without a follow-up. But the evening passed without another ring, and I moved through it slowly, making dinner from what I had brought up in the cooler, eating, standing at the kitchen counter, the way I often did when I was thinking hard about something, the food barely registering. I went to bed at 10. I slept finally the heavy, dreamless sleep of a man whose body has decided that enough is enough regardless of what his mind wants to do about it. In the morning, I made coffee, took it out to the small porch off the back of the cabin, and sat in the old wooden chair that had been there since before I bought the place, watching the sun come up over the ridge in long, cold strips of gold and pale blue. The snow had stopped overnight. The world was white and clean and entirely indifferent to the Voss family's problems. I was on my second cup when my phone buzzed on the armrest. A text message from Claudia. I had not expected a text. In 20 years of being her father, Claudia had communicated with me primarily through phone calls. She found texting imprecise. She once told me not enough control over tone. The fact that she was texting now meant either she had given up on getting me on the phone, or she had decided a written record was safer than a spoken one. I was not sure which of those possibilities bothered me more. I picked up the phone and read, "Dad, when you're back, can we sit down? Just the two of us. I think it's time we talked about your future, about making sure you're properly taken care of. I've been doing some research, and I think there are options that would make your life so much easier. You deserve that." I read it twice. The language was careful, too careful, the way a document is careful when someone has spent time on it. Properly taken care of. Options that would make your life easier. You deserve that. Each phrase landing with the soft, padded precision of a thing that had been measured before being placed. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then a second message arrived. A link. I tapped it. The page that loaded was a website, professional, well-designed, the kind that costs real money to build. A large photograph across the top, a sun-filled common room, white-haired men and women playing cards at round tables, smiling with the particular brightness of stock photography. Below the photo in clean serif font, Harborview Senior Care, Lake Tahoe. Gracious living for the season of life you've earned. My fingers went cold around the phone. I kept reading. The amenities, the memory care wing, the on-site medical staff available around the clock. The phrase dignified transition, appearing twice in the first paragraph, the kind of language designed to make an institution sound like a gift, rather than what it actually was, a place where families put people they have decided are no longer capable of managing themselves. 3 seconds later, a third message. Wrong link, sorry, ignore that. I looked at those 3 words for a long time. Wrong link, sorry, ignore that. The thing about a wrong link is that it tells you exactly what someone has been researching. You do not accidentally send a link to a memory care facility unless that facility's website has been open in your browser recently enough that it surfaces when you are copying something else. You do not apologize that quickly unless you know the instant you hit send precisely what you have revealed. My jaw was so tight it ached. I stood up from the porch chair, walked inside, set my coffee down on the counter, and picked up my phone again. I opened the message thread and pressed and held the first message, then the second, then the third. Screenshot. I took 2 of them from 2 slightly different angles, making sure every timestamp was legible. Then I stood at the kitchen counter and looked at what I had. 3 text messages from my daughter. 1 asking to talk about my future. 1 linking to a memory care facility in Lake Tahoe. 1 pretending it was an accident. I set the phone down and pressed both palms flat against the counter edge and made myself breathe slowly for 30 seconds. They were not just trying to take the house. They were not just trying to get the deed transferred. They were building a case, a story constructed and distributed piece by piece to everyone within reach that Stellan Voss was no longer capable of making his own decisions. Get enough people believing that story, get it on enough recorded lines and intake forms and casual conversations, and then sit him down in front of 50 witnesses and present him with paperwork while the story does all the heavy lifting. He won't argue. He hates scenes. He never acts until it's too late. My eyes went to the desk drawer where the folded email from Declan was sitting beneath the legal pad. Then they went to the side table where the cedar box sat with the brass latch closed. File 24. Silas has the rest. I walked to the side table, picked up the cedar box. sat down in the armchair, opened the latch, reached past the photograph and the key and the cocktail napkin, and picked up the white envelope. Nora's handwriting looked up at me. File 24. Silas has the rest. Open this when you need to, not before. My hands were not steady this time, not the way they had been when I ended Beckett's call. They had a faint tremor in them, the kind that comes not from fear, but from the physical effort of containing something large. I turned the envelope over and worked my thumb under the sealed flap. The paper inside was folded into quarters. I opened it slowly. 2 pages in Nora's handwriting, small even the penmanship of a woman who had written legal documents by hand for 20 years and never lost the precision of it. At the top of the first page, underlined, for Stellan. If you are reading this, call Silas in the morning. He has everything. Trust the file. Trust him. And trust what I built for you, because I built it knowing exactly what was coming. Below that, in smaller letters, a single line that cracked something open in the center of my chest so completely and so quietly that I did not realize I was crying until I felt the wetness on the back of my hand. I loved you too much to leave you unprotected, so I didn't. I folded the pages back along their creases and pressed them against my sternum and sat in that armchair in the cold cabin morning for a very long time. My eyes closed, my chest heaving with the kind of grief that lives so deep, it only comes out when something finally gives it permission. She had known. She had known years before I did, and she had spent the last of her strength making sure I would not face it alone. When my breathing had steadied enough, I wiped my face with the back of my hand, got up, walked to the desk, and picked up the phone. Silas Merritt answered on the second ring. Stellan, he said. And then after a pause just long enough to mean something, I've been waiting for this call. I drove down to Reno on the morning of December 11th. The highway was clear, the sky the hard, brilliant blue that only happens at altitude in December, when the storm has passed and the air has been scrubbed clean. I had the heater running and the radio off and both hands on the wheel, and I did not think about anything in particular, because there are times when thinking gets in the way of arriving. Silas Merritt's office was on the 4th floor of a building on Court Street, 2 blocks from the federal courthouse. I had been coming to that office for 25 years, first with Nora, then without her. The receptionist knew my name before I said it. The coffee was already made. Silas was standing when I walked in. 67 years old, lean, with the kind of face that had always looked slightly older than it was, not worn, just settled like wood that has dried to its final grain. He had been our attorney since before Claudia was born. He had sat at our kitchen table enough times to know where we kept the good scotch. He extended his hand. I shook it. Sit down, Stellan, he said. We have a lot to go through. I sat. He sat across from me, reached into the bottom drawer of his desk and lifted out a folder that was thicker than I expected, dark green, worn at the corners, the kind of folder that has been handled many times over many years. He set it on the desk between us. File 24, he said. I looked at it. My chest felt tight. How long have you had this? Nora gave it to me 3 years ago, 2 weeks before she passed. Silas folded his hands on the desk. She said, Silas, when Stellan calls, open it with him, not before, not without him. He paused. I have kept that instruction to the letter. 3 years, I said. My voice came out rough at the edges. She wanted it ready. She did not want you to know it existed until you needed it. He looked at me steadily. She said, if you knew, you would spend your energy managing it instead of living your life. She did not want that for you. My throat tightened so hard I had to clear it twice before I could speak. Open it, I said. Silas opened the folder. What followed was 2 hours of the most concentrated legal education I had received since the early years of Voss Capital, when I had sat in rooms very much like this one, learning the language of trusts and corporations and the architecture of protected wealth. Except this time, the architecture had been built for me without my knowledge by the person who understood better than anyone what I would one day need. The first document was a revocable living trust established 8 years ago, amended twice, converted to irrevocable upon Nora's death 3 years prior. In plain terms, it meant that every significant asset Stellan and Nora Voss had ever accumulated, the Lake Tahoe property, the Truckee cabin, the investment portfolio, and the entirety of Voss Capital's managed holdings, had been transferred into the trust. The trust named Stellan as sole trustee for his lifetime, with full control and full benefit. Upon his death, the assets would pass directly to the grandchildren. Claudia is not named anywhere in this document, Silas said, turning a page toward me. Not as a beneficiary, not as a successor trustee, not in any capacity. I stared at the page. She never was. Nora removed her name in the First Amendment, 8 years ago. Silas met my eyes. The same week she and I first discussed the possibility of a competency challenge being used against you. The air went out of the room. 8 years ago, I said. Nora came to me after a conversation she overheard between Claudia and Beckett at a dinner party. She would not tell me the specifics. Attorney-client privilege covers what she told me, but I can tell you that whatever she heard was enough to make her act within the week. Silas turned another page. She was methodical about it. Not angry, just certain. I pressed the back of my knuckle against my mouth and stared at the document. 8 years. Nora had been carrying this for 8 years and had never said a word to me beyond that one conversation on the deck, the one I had dismissed, the one I had told her she was wrong about. She wasn't wrong, I said mostly to myself. No, Silas said quietly. She was not. He walked me through the rest of the file, the 30-day notice to quit pre-drafted, needing only a date and a notary stamp. The trust amendment that explicitly documented the reasons for Claudia's exclusion, written in Nora's own hand, across 3 pages of careful, precise legal reasoning. And at the very back of the folder, a small padded envelope sealed with clear tape, my name written on the outside in handwriting. I would have known in complete darkness. She asked me to keep that sealed, Silas said. She said you would know what to do with it when you saw it. I picked up the envelope. It was light, small, rectangular. A USB drive, I realized as soon as I held it. A video, Silas said, answering the question I had not asked yet. She recorded it about 6 months before she passed. She said it was for you, private. He folded his hands again. I have never opened it. My hand closed around the envelope so tightly my knuckles went white. Silas. My voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. Why did she do all of this without telling me? Why not? Just why not say something? Silas was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful and honest in equal measure. She said 2 things to me about that. The first was that she wanted you to have a choice to be able to decide how to handle this without feeling like she had made the decision for you from beyond the grave. He paused. The second thing she said was that she knew you. She said if you knew the full picture while she was still alive, you would spend whatever time you had left together managing a problem instead of simply being with her. My eyes burned so badly I had to look at the ceiling for a moment. She protected you the way she did everything, Silas said. Thoroughly, quietly, and completely on her own terms. I nodded once because speaking was not something I was capable of in that particular moment. Silas slid the folder across the desk toward me. Take it with you. Read it all tonight. And Stellan, whatever you decide to do, I am ready to move the moment you give me the word. I will, I said. I picked up the folder and the small padded envelope and stood. My legs felt steadier than they had any right to. Silas, thank you for keeping this. For all of it. He stood as well, came around the desk and shook my hand again, firmer this time. The grip of a man who means something by it. 25 years, he said. It was never a question. I walked out of that office and down 4 flights of stairs and out into the cold Reno afternoon, and I sat in my Jeep in the parking garage for 6 full minutes, without starting the engine, the folder on the passenger seat, and the small padded envelope in my hands, turning it over and over in my fingers. Nora had known. She had known for 8 years, and she had spent 8 years building a wall around me so carefully and so quietly that I had never once felt its presence. Only now, when I needed it most, did I understand it had been there the whole time. I started the engine and pointed the Jeep north toward Truckee. Tonight I was going to hear my wife's voice one more time. Before I tell you what was on that USB drive, what Nora recorded 6 months before she died. What she had been quietly preparing for years, without ever telling me, I need to know you are still with me. If you are here, drop the number 10 in the comments right now. Just that. Nothing else. Let me see how many of us are in this room together. A gentle note. The story continuing from here contains fictional elements shaped for reflection and meaning. If that is not what you came for today, this is a perfectly good place to step away, no hard feelings at all. For everyone staying, hold on. It is about to get very real. I built a fire first, not because the cabin was cold, the heater had been running since I got back, but because some conversations deserve warmth. Even when the person you are about to hear from is no longer here to feel it. I stacked the logs the way Nora had taught me, smaller pieces at the base, to catch first the larger wood on top to hold the heat. She had grown up in a house with a wood-burning stove, and she knew the geometry of fire the way she knew the geometry of most things, practically from the ground up, with no patience for shortcuts. I struck the match and watched the kindling take and held my hands out over the young flame until some of the tension in my fingers began to ease. Then I sat down in the armchair, opened the laptop on the side table, and took the small padded envelope from my shirt pocket. My hands were not steady. I noticed that without judgment, the way you notice that the temperature has dropped, as useful information rather than a problem to solve. I worked the tape loose from the envelope flap and tipped the USB drive out onto my palm. Small, black, unremarkable. The kind of thing you could lose in a coat pocket and not find for months. I plugged it in. One file. No title. Just a date 4 years ago, 6 months before the diagnosis changed everything. I pressed play. The screen filled with the image of Nora sitting at the desk in our home office in Lake Tahoe. Afternoon light came through the window behind her, soft and golden, the kind of light that exists in late October when the aspens have gone yellow and the air carries the first real bite of coming winter. She was wearing the blue cardigan she had owned for 15 years, the one with the small moth hole near the left cuff that she refused to throw away because she said it had earned its place. She looked healthy. She looked exactly like herself. My breath left my body in one long, involuntary exhale, and I pressed both hands flat against my thighs to stop them from shaking. Stellan, her voice. After 3 years of silence, her actual voice, warm and precise and slightly lower than people expected when they first met her. The voice I had heard say my name 10,000 times, in 10,000 different registers of love and irritation and laughter and quiet. If you're watching this, then I was right. And I'm sorry for that, not because I'm wrong, but because being right about this particular thing means you're sitting somewhere difficult right now. I pressed the back of my hand hard against my mouth. I want to tell you some things. She continued, settling back slightly in the chair, folding her hands on the desk, with the composed ease of a woman who had given depositions and argued before judges, and never once let anyone see her sweat. First, I love you. I have loved you since the day you offered me a job I didn't want, and dinner I did, and I will love you past every boundary of time and sense and reason. That is not what this video is about, but I needed to say it first, so that you hear everything else through that. My chest cracked open. I did not try to stop it. Claudia, she said, and her voice changed, not harder exactly, but more careful, the way you handle something you have examined many times and still treat with full attention. I know you have always wanted to believe the best of her, Stellan. I know that comes from your own goodness. But I need you to understand what I understand, because I will not be there to tell you when it matters. She leaned forward slightly. Claudia has been gathering information about our assets for years. Not asking gathering. Through Lorraine. Your sister has been feeding her details about the trust structure, the firm's holdings, the property valuations, things she learned from family conversations over decades that she had no business sharing. Nora's jaw tightened for just a moment. I confronted Lorraine about it once. She denied it. But she used a figure, a specific number from the Voss Capital quarterly report that she could only have gotten from Claudia because I had only shared it with you and with Silas. That was when I knew for certain. I thought about Lorraine's voice on the phone. Warm on the surface. A blade underneath. What they want is not the house, Nora said. The house is the mechanism. What they want is the fund. Beckett's financial situation is worse than you know. I have seen enough of his behavior to understand that he is a man who has been spending far beyond his means for a long time and is running out of road. $48 million in managed assets would solve every problem he has and give Claudia the control she has always believed she deserved. She paused, looked directly into the camera with those gray eyes that had never once told me a comfortable lie. The cleanest way to access those assets is to have a court determine that you are no longer capable of managing them yourself. That is what this is building towards Stellan. A competency challenge. Witnesses. Documentation of decline. A narrative constructed carefully enough that it looks like concern rather than strategy. My jaw was so tight it ached all the way into my skull. I have made sure that cannot happen, she said, and something in her voice shifted, not softer, but warmer, the way it got when she was most certain of something. Silas has the file. Everything is locked. They cannot touch the fund. They cannot touch the properties. They cannot touch anything that matters, not through a court, not through a signature, not through any mechanism they have planned. A pause. But I cannot make the decision for you about how to handle it when the moment comes. That is yours. It always was. She unfolded her hands and placed them flat on the desk, the gesture she made when she was about to say something final. You have two choices. You can let Silas handle it quietly, notices legal filings, no confrontation. That is the cleaner path. Her eyes held the camera. Or you can walk into whatever room they have prepared and let the truth come out in front of every witness they have gathered. That is the harder path. The smallest, most private smile crossed her face, the one she kept for moments she had not decided to share yet. I think I know which one you will choose. I think I have always known. But I wanted you to know that either way, you are not alone. You were never alone. I made sure of that. The video ended. The screen went dark. I sat in the armchair with the firelight moving on the walls around me, and Nora's last image still printed behind my eyes. The blue cardigan, the afternoon light, the hands flat on the desk, and I cried. Not the controlled, managed grief I had been carrying for 3 years, the kind you fold up and put in your coat pocket and carry without showing. This was the other kind, the kind that starts somewhere below your ribs and moves upward without asking permission, that takes the breath and the composure and every carefully constructed wall you have built and reduces them to nothing for however long it needs to. I let it. When it had run its course, I wiped my face with the back of my hand and looked at the fire and took 3 long, slow breaths. You were right, I said out loud, to the empty room, to the dark screen, to whatever remained of Nora in the cedar smell of the cabin and the weight of a cedar box on the side table. You were always right, and I should have listened the first time. The fire crackled. The pines outside moved in the night wind. I picked up the phone and called Silas. I've made my decision, I said when he answered. I'm going to the dinner. Silas did not hesitate. Then we do this your way, he said. Tell me what you need. The morning of December 12th arrived with a sky so pale it looked like the world had forgotten how to hold color. I stood at the kitchen window with a mug of black coffee, watching a thin layer of frost coat the pine needles outside. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, an old man gray at the temples, still standing, still sharp. I pressed the mug against my palm and felt the warmth spread up through my fingers. Then I picked up the phone and called Silas. He answered on the second ring. "Stellan, I figured you'd call this morning. I watched the video 3 times," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. She was more prepared than I gave her credit for. "Nora was always the architect," Silas said, and I could hear the quiet pride in his voice. "She built the trust, she documented the amendments, she recorded that video 6 months before she passed all of it points to one thing. She knew exactly what was coming." My chest tightened. She knew about Lorraine. Yes. Silas let that word settle like a stone dropped into still water. She had documentation of at least 4 separate conversations between Lorraine and Claudia going back to 2021. Names, dates, content summaries. It's all in file 24. I set my coffee down before I dropped it. My hand was trembling not from cold, but from something deeper, something raw and unnameable. My own sister. Nora had known and had said nothing had protected me from the knowledge until I was ready to act on it rather than simply grieve it. "What do I do with that?" I asked. "Nothing yet," Silas said. "You let the trust do the work. Your job right now is to show up on the 24th, look your daughter in the eye, and not flinch. Can you do that?" I almost laughed. "Silas, I built a $48 million fund from a single room above a laundromat in Reno. I think I can walk into my own dining room." "Good," he said. "Then let's go over the sequence." We ran through the final sequence one last time, Conrad's release form. The moment I would present the trust documents, the legal notices Silas would hand-deliver the following morning. Everything was already in place. This call was confirmation, not planning. By the time we finished, the frost outside had melted, and the pine needles were dripping with thin, bright water. I called Conrad next, Stellan. His voice was warm and rough, the voice of a man who had spent 30 years shouting orders across a commercial kitchen. "I was wondering when you'd check in." "The release form," I said. "Is it ready?" "Printed, signed by my coordinator and sitting in a sealed envelope on my desk," Conrad said. "The moment I read it aloud in front of those 50 guests, your name is on every line as the sole property owner. No wiggle room. Perfect." I felt something unknot in my chest. "Conrad, I need you to understand, this dinner is going to get complicated. If anyone pressures you to change the form, let them try," he said, and his voice hardened with the kind of certainty that comes from decades of holding a kitchen together under pressure. "You've been straight with me for 15 years, Stellan. Nobody is going to rewrite your name off that form, not in my presence." My eyes stung. I blinked hard and looked out the window at the mountains. "Thank you," I managed. "Don't thank me yet. Save it for after the dinner." A pause, then softer. "How are you holding up? Honestly?" I exhaled slowly. "I'm angry, but I'm clear." "That's exactly where you need to be," Conrad said. After I hung up, I opened the family group chat. 41 members. Christmas decorations, shared recipes, Claudia's carefully crafted updates about the dinner. I typed one sentence and hit send before I could second-guess myself. "Looking forward to Christmas Eve. I'll be there." Responses flooded in within minutes. Emojis, exclamation points. Claudia's reply arriving faster than anyone else's, "So glad, Dad. It's going to be a wonderful night." I read her words and felt my jaw tighten. She had no idea that the wonderful night she was planning was the last one she'd ever plan in my name. My phone rang. Claudia calling directly now, not through the chat. I answered. "Claudia, Dad, I just saw your message." Her voice was bright, almost musical, the kind of brightness that takes effort to maintain. "I'm so relieved," I was worried you might cancel. I never said I was canceling, I said evenly. Well, you've been so quiet lately, we've all been a little concerned. Lorraine mentioned you sounded tired. My grip on the phone tightened. I'm 69, Claudia, not confused. A beat. Her brightness flickered. Of course not, Dad. I just meant, I'll be there on the 24th, I said. Make sure there's enough food. 50 people is a lot to feed. I paused just long enough. Good thing I hired a real caterer. I ended the call before she could respond. I set the phone face down on the counter. My heart was hammering, but my hands were steady. Nora had been right about something else, too. The hardest part wasn't the confrontation. It was the waiting. The drive from Truckee to Reno takes about 40 minutes when the roads are clear. That morning, they were not clear. A thin snowfall had glazed the highway overnight, and I drove slowly, both hands on the wheel, watching the mountains turn from gray to white as I descended toward the valley. I wasn't in a hurry. I had learned at 69 that urgency is mostly noise. The things that matter tend to wait for you if you move toward them with purpose. Silas's office was on the 4th floor of a building on Court Street, 2 blocks from the federal courthouse. Petra, his assistant, met me at the elevator. His assistant, a young woman named Petra, efficient and sharp-eyed, met me at the elevator. Mr. Voss, she said, reaching to take my coat. He's been in since 7. Of course he has, I said. Silas hasn't slept past 6 in 30 years. She smiled, and I followed her down a corridor lined with framed Nevada bar certificates, past a wall of legal volumes that had never been decorative in this office, and into Silas's corner room. The view through the window was the city laid out flat beneath a white sky, the river a dark ribbon cutting through it. Silas stood when I entered. He was 67, slightly stooped now, with silver hair he'd given up fighting and reading glasses perpetually perched above his forehead. He extended his hand, and when I shook it, he held on a moment longer than necessary. "Sit down, Stellan," he said. "Before we start, how are you actually—" "I watched Nora's video 3 times, I said, dropping into the chair across from his desk. "The second time I cried. The third time I took notes." Silas's expression shifted. Something complicated moved across his face, grief and admiration tangled together. "She recorded it in this office, you know. Sat right where you're sitting." My throat closed. I pressed my lips together and breathed through my nose until the tightness passed. "Of course she did," she said, and I'm quoting directly. Silas opened a folder, found a post-it note stuck to the first page, and read it aloud. "Tell him I'm not leaving him defenseless. I'm just leaving him prepared." Her exact words. The tightness in my throat became something else, a warmth that spread from my chest outward, painful and clean at the same time. I gripped the armrests and steadied myself. "Let's get to work," I said. My voice was rough, but it held. Silas had the originals waiting on his desk, the notarized copies stamped and recorded with the county. Everything now a matter of permanent public record. He slid the deed confirmation across to me. Not for signing, just for me to hold. "It's done," he said simply. "As of this morning, it's all on file." I looked at the pages for a long moment, not reading them, just holding them the way you hold something you almost lost. Silas gathered the pages, squared them against the desk, and slid them into a dark green folder. He sealed it with a brass clip. Then he looked at me with the expression of a man who has held a secret for 3 years and finally put it down. "Stellan," he said, "she loved you very much." "I know," I said again. But this time my voice broke on the second word, just slightly, just enough for both of us to hear. I cleared my throat and stood reaching for my coat. "I'll see you on the 24th. "I'll be at the door at 7, Silas said. I nodded once and walked out into the corridor past the certificates and the legal volumes and efficient Petra and into the elevator. The doors closed, and for 11 floors I stood completely still, one hand flat against the cold steel wall, and let myself feel everything Nora had prepared me to feel and nothing more. The doors opened. I stepped out into the lobby and walked back toward the parking garage. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was clearing. Somewhere in that city, my daughter was planning a Christmas party she believed would end with my name on documents transferring everything I owned into her hands. She had no idea those documents were already signed. Just not by me. 3 days after I signed the last document in Silas's office, I drove back down from Truckee to check on Conrad. It was the afternoon of December 16th, and the sky over the lake had gone the color of old pewter. Conrad ran his operation out of a commercial kitchen on the south end of Lake Tahoe, a wide, low building that always smelled of garlic and wood smoke, no matter the season. I pushed open the side door and found him exactly where I expected, standing at the long stainless steel counter, reviewing a printed menu with a red pen in his hand, and a look on his face like the menu had personally offended him. "You're early," Conrad said without looking up. "You told me to come before Thursday," I said, pulling a stool up to the counter. "It's Tuesday. I'm being generous." He finally looked up, and his expression softened just slightly, the way a man's face does when he sees someone he's genuinely relieved is still standing. "Coffee's on the back burner. Help yourself." I poured a mug and sat down. The kitchen hummed with refrigeration units and the distant sound of someone chopping in the prep room. Normal sounds, steady sounds. I needed both. "Tell me about Beckett's second call," I said. Conrad set down the red pen. He crossed his arms over his chest, and I could see the tension move through his shoulders like a current. "He called again on the 14th. Sunday morning just past 9. My coordinator took it first, then transferred it to me when he started asking about the ownership clause." "What exactly did he say?" "He said—" Conrad paused, pressing his lips together as if tasting the words before repeating them. "He said, 'We're family, so you can just put the booking under the family name. No need to get technical about who owns what.' I told him the release form requires the legal property owner's signature period. That's not a preference, that's our liability structure." My jaw tightened. "And—" He pushed back. Conrad's voice hardened. He said Mr. Voss tends to get confused about these things. We handle the administrative side for him now. I told him that was very interesting, and that I would need written authorization from Mr. Voss himself confirming any change in signatory. He went quiet for about 4 seconds, then said he'd call back. Conrad picked up his pen again, tapped it once against the counter. He never did. The words "tends to get confused" sat in my chest, like a coal, small, hot, and burning steadily. I took a slow sip of coffee and kept my voice level. "That phrase, he used it with you too." "That phrase is rehearsed," Conrad said flatly. "I've been in the service industry for 30 years, Stellan. I know the difference between a man who's worried about his father-in-law and a man who's building a narrative. Beckett Hargrove is building a narrative." "He is," I agreed. "He needs 50 witnesses to hear that narrative on Christmas Eve." Conrad stared at me. "The party is a setup." "The party is a stage," I said. "Claudia and Beckett want 50 people in that room when I sign documents transferring property rights. The more witnesses, the harder it is to contest later." I set down my mug. "Which is also why those same 50 people are going to be in the room when I don't sign." Conrad let out a slow breath, and something shifted in his face from alarm to something harder and more deliberate. "The release form," he said. "That's why you wanted it read aloud. In front of every guest before dinner is served," I said. "So that 50 people hear my name as the sole property owner before a single document gets placed in front of me." Conrad pressed both palms flat on the counter and leaned forward. "Stellan, I want you to understand something. I have worked for this family for you since 2010. If anyone in that room tries to stop me from reading that form, I will finish reading it standing on the table if I have to." My throat tightened. My eyes went hot, and I blinked hard, looking down at the counter for a moment. This man had known me 15 years, had cooked at Nora's last birthday. Dinner had stood outside the cabin the night she passed, and left a pot of soup on the front step without knocking. "Conrad," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "Thank you. Don't get sentimental on me," he said, but his own voice had gone thick. "Save it for the 24th. He straightened up and picked up the menu again. "Now, 50 people. I'm thinking beef tenderloin and a winter salad. Your daughter requested lamb, but it's your house." "Beef tenderloin," I said. "Good man." I finished my coffee, shook his hand at the door, and drove back up the mountain as the last of the daylight drained out of the sky. My hands were steady on the wheel. My chest was full of something that felt against all reason, almost like gratitude. I spent the days between the 16th and the 20th of December the way I had spent many difficult stretches of my life, quietly and with purpose. I reviewed the trust documents twice more, drove to the post office to confirm a certified letter, had reached Silas and reread Declan's anonymous email so many times I had memorized every line. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. Please be careful." 13 words. I had built an entire strategy around 13 words written by a 16-year-old boy who was afraid of his own mother. On the morning of December 20th, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The area code was local South Lake Tahoe. "It's me. Don't say my name back. Can we talk?" My heart lurched hard in my chest. I typed back, "Call me. I'm alone." The phone rang 40 seconds later. I answered immediately. "Grandpa." His voice was low, barely above a whisper, and I could hear the tension in it, the careful, controlled fear of someone who had learned to speak quietly inside their own home. Declan. 16 years old and already an expert in keeping secrets from his parents. "I'm here," I said. I kept my voice calm even though my throat was tightening by the second. "Are you safe?" "Yeah. I'm in my car. I told Mom I was going to study at Marcus's place." A breath. "I have about an hour." "Then talk to me." He exhaled, and in that exhale I could hear everything, the weight of what he'd been carrying. The loneliness of knowing something terrible and having nowhere to put it. "They had a meeting last night," he said. "Mom, Dad, and Aunt Lorraine. In the study with the door closed. I heard most of it through the vent." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles ached. "What did they say?" "Dad said the papers are ready. A guardianship petition, that's what he called it." Declan's voice cracked slightly on the word guardianship, and I heard him swallow hard to steady it. "He said once you sign the property transfer at the party, they file the petition the next morning. Mom said the signatures from the dinner would prove you were lucid enough to consent, but that the pattern of," she said, "cognitive inconsistencies." He stopped. I had to look that up. I know what it means now. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I pressed my free hand flat against the kitchen table and breathed. Cognitive inconsistencies. My daughter had built a legal vocabulary around the idea of my decline. She had done it carefully over time, the way you build anything meant to last brick by brick, word by word. "Declan," I said, keeping my voice steady for his sake more than my own. "How long have you known about this?" "Since October." His voice went tight with guilt. "I found a folder on Dad's laptop when I was using it for a school project. I wasn't snooping." "I swear, Grandpa." "I wasn't. But the file name said Voss Estate Plan. And I opened it, and His voice broke. A stifled sound, something between a sob and a sharp breath. "I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I didn't know if you'd believe me." "I believe you," I said immediately. "I believed you the moment I read your email." A pause, then quietly, "You knew it was me." "You called me Grandpa," I said. "You're the only person on this earth who still does." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, and wasn't quite a cry, something raw and young and exhausted. My eyes burned. I pressed them shut for 3 full seconds and felt the ache move through my chest like a slow tide. Grandpa. His voice was steadier now but urgent. Last night Mom said something else. She said you won't fight it. She said you never fight back. That you just go quiet and let things happen. He stopped. Is that true? I felt something rise in me, not anger, not quite. Something older and quieter and far more resolute. No, I said. That's not true. Good. And in that single word, I heard relief so enormous it nearly undid me. Because Aunt Lorraine gave Mom a whole list of your assets. The fund, the cabin, the villa, the accounts. She had it all written down. I know about Lorraine, I said. Another pause. Are you going to be okay? I looked out the window at the snow on the pine branches, heavy and white, bending the boughs low without breaking them. Yes, I said. And Declan, on the 24th, I need you to stay close, not in the middle of things, just close enough to see. I'll be there, he said. His voice had gone firm. 16 years old, and already learning what it meant to stand still and witness. Be careful going home, I said. You too, Grandpa, he hung up. I set the phone on the table and pressed both hands over my face, and for a long moment I let the full weight of it press down my daughter's cold planning. Lorraine's betrayal, Declan's frightened courage, Beckett's desperation, all of it at once. Then I straightened up, dropped my hands, and looked at the cedar box sitting on the shelf above the fireplace. She said you never fight back. Claudia had told Beckett I would go quiet and let things happen. In 11 years of marriage, in 15 years of building Voss Capital, in 49 years of knowing Nora, I had learned one thing about power. The most dangerous move a person can make is convincing their opponent they've already won. 4 days left. I arrived at the Lake Tahoe Villa at 7:45 in the morning on December 24th, 2 full hours before anyone was supposed to be there. That was intentional. I had a key. Of course I had a key. It was my house, and I let myself in through the side entrance off the mudroom, the one that opened onto the hallway, running parallel to the main kitchen. The villa was already warm. Someone had come in the night before and turned on the heating set, out the long dining tables, arranged winter greenery along the mantel. Claudia's work, or someone she'd hired. The house smelled of pine and beeswax candles, and something underneath both of those things, something clinical and unfamiliar, like a room being prepared for a purpose other than celebration. I set my coat on the mudroom bench and stood still for a moment, listening. The house breathed around me, the tick of the heating ducts, the distant sound of wind off the lake pressing against the west-facing windows. Then I heard voices from the study. The study door was half open. I moved down the hallway, not quietly, not quickly, just steadily, the way a man moves through a house he has owned for 22 years. I stopped 2 feet from the doorway and listened. Beckett was speaking first. He confirmed he's coming. Lorraine got a text from him last night. I know he's coming. Claudia's voice was controlled, smooth, stripped of anything that resembled warmth. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking whether the documents are formatted the way Silas will recognize. They're formatted correctly. Beckett's voice carried the strained patience of a man who had answered this question more than once. Property transfer standard quit-claim structure, his name on the signature line. Once he signs in front of 50 people, it's witnessed, it's dated, and it's done. And if he hesitates, a pause. Then Beckett said, he won't. He never does. You know how he gets at big family events. He just wants everyone to be comfortable. He'll sign because it's easier than making a scene. I pressed my back against the hallway wall and let those words move through me slowly. He just wants everyone to be comfortable. He'll sign because it's easier than making a scene. My own son-in-law describing me with the casual precision of a man who had studied his target and found him predictable. My jaw clenched so hard my back teeth ached. But it was Claudia's response that nearly broke something open in my chest. "Good," she said. "After tonight, we won't need to manage him anymore. Silas gets the filing Monday morning. By the time Dad realizes what the guardianship petition means, it'll already be in front of a judge. By the time Dad realizes." I closed my eyes for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds of standing in my own hallway, in my own house, listening to my daughter schedule the end of my independence like it was a calendar appointment. The pain was not the sharp kind, it was the slow kind, the kind that settles into the bones and stays. My throat burned. My chest felt hollowed out and heavy at once. Then I opened my eyes. I stepped into the doorway. Claudia was standing at the desk with a folder open in front of her. Beckett was by the window with his phone in his hand. They both turned when I appeared, and for one unguarded moment, just one, I saw it cross both their faces. The flicker, the adjustment, the rapid recalibration of two people caught mid-sentence doing something they could not take back. Claudia recovered first. She smiled, and the smile was warm and practiced and entirely hollow. "Dad, you're early." "I own the house," I said pleasantly. "I don't need an arrival time." Beckett put his phone in his pocket. "Stellan, good to see you. Big night tonight." "It is," I agreed. I let my gaze move from his face to Claudia's, and then to the open folder on the desk. I did not reach for it. I did not need to. "What's in the folder, Claudia?" Her chin lifted just slightly. "Just the event schedule, seating chart, catering timeline." "Of course," I said. I held her gaze for 2 full seconds, long enough for her to understand that I was not confused, not tired, not manageable, and then I smiled the same way she had. "I'll be in the sitting room when Conrad arrives. Don't let me keep you." I walked down the hallway and into the sitting room and stood at the window that faced the lake. The water was the color of pewter beneath the winter sky, and it was absolutely still. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the effort of holding everything in until the right moment. By the time Dad realizes she had said, I pressed my palm flat against the cold window pane and felt the chill travel up through my wrist and into my arm. Claudia had planned this for 2 years. She had practiced her smile. She had formatted the documents correctly. She had 50 witnesses arriving in 10 hours. What she had not planned for was that her father had arrived first. Conrad's team arrived at 9:30, rolling in 3 white vans packed with equipment and covered trays. I watched from the sitting room window as they unloaded, and something in my chest loosened slightly. The sight of Conrad stepping out of the lead van, in his black chef's coat, clipboard in hand, scanning the driveway, with the calm authority of a man who had run 100 events and never once lost control of one. By 6 in the evening, the villa had been transformed. The great room glowed with candlelight, and the soft amber of string lights wound through the ceiling beams. 50 place settings covered 3 long tables pushed together in a horseshoe arrangement. White linen winter centerpieces of pine and white berries, crystal glasses catching the light like small fires. The smell of beef tenderloin drifted from the kitchen, warm and rich, and somewhere near the front door, a string quartet was playing something slow and classical that I did not recognize but that Nora would have named immediately. Guests began arriving at 6:15. I stood near the fireplace and greeted each one, old colleagues, cousins I hadn't seen in 2 years, neighbors from the Tahoe community, people who had attended Nora's funeral and brought casseroles afterward. Each handshake, each embrace, each "Stellan, you look well," landed against me like small reassurances. I was here. I was present. I was not confused. Claudia moved through the room in a deep red dress, her hair swept back, her smile operating at full voltage. She touched shoulders, laughed at the right moments, guided people toward their seats, with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed this night many times over. Beckett stayed near the bar, one hand always around a drink, his eyes moving across the room in a way that had nothing relaxed in it. I noticed Lorraine arrive at 6:40. She wore green and she hugged me the way a person hugs someone they've wronged too long, too tight, with an energy that felt like apology and justification wound together. I hugged her back with equal warmth and said nothing that was not true. Declan arrived with his parents dressed in a dark blazer that looked like it belonged to someone slightly taller. He caught my eye across the room, and his jaw was tight, and his shoulders were braced. The posture of a boy trying very hard to look like he was not carrying the weight of the room on his back. I gave him one small nod. His shoulders dropped exactly 1 inch. At 7:15, Conrad stepped out of the kitchen and crossed the room toward me. He leaned close and said low and even, "The release form is in my inside pocket." I read it before the first course as planned. "Good," I said. "Thank you, Conrad." He straightened up and went back to his kitchen, and I turned back toward the fireplace and nearly walked directly into a man in a full Santa Claus costume. He was broad-shouldered, silver-bearded under the white trim, and his eyes above the costume were sharp and pale gray. Someone had hired a Santa for the event. Conrad's touch, I realized later, his way of adding cover for the one person in that room who needed to move without being noticed. Santa extended a hand. I shook it. "Mr. Voss," he said, his voice low and private beneath the noise of the room. "Conrad sends his regards, and one reminder." He leaned in slightly. "Don't sign anything tonight until Silas is standing beside you. Not a card. Not a form. Nothing." He released the handshake and stepped back, his expression returning to the broad Santa smile. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Voss," he said loudly enough for the guests nearest us to hear, and moved away into the crowd. My whole body went rigid. My hand tightened around his before I could stop it. He released the handshake and stepped back, his expression returning to the broad, benevolent Santa smile, warm, public, completely unrevealing. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Voss," he said loudly enough for the two guests nearest us to hear, and moved away into the crowd. I stood at the fireplace and felt my pulse hammering in my ears. My legs were not entirely steady. I pressed one hand against the mantel and held on, turning the warning over in my mind with the focus of a man who had spent 40 years assessing risk. Don't drink anything your daughter hands you personally. Not a joke. Not a seasonal pleasantry. The man's eyes had been entirely serious, and he had known my name without being introduced. I turned back to the fireplace and gripped the mantel with both hands, my knuckles going white, my heart slamming against my ribs. Somewhere in this room was a man in a Santa costume who knew something I didn't. Somewhere in this room, Conrad had a release form in his pocket. Somewhere near the front door, Silas Merritt had just arrived. I could see his silver head moving through the entrance, his dark green folder tucked under his arm. The first course had not yet been served, and the room had no idea what was about to happen inside it. Conrad stepped out of the kitchen at precisely 7:45, just as the last of the 50 guests had settled into their seats. He walked to the center of the horseshoe arrangement of tables, unbuttoned his chef's coat, with the unhurried confidence of a man who owned every room he entered, and withdrew a sealed envelope from his inside pocket. The string quartet finished their piece and stopped. The room shifted its attention. "Before we begin this evening," Conrad said, his voice carrying cleanly across the great room, "I want to read a standard release of liability as required by our catering contract. This is routine procedure." He opened the envelope, unfolded a single page, and read clearly. "This event is held at a private residence located at 4 Lakeview Ridge, Lake Tahoe, Nevada. The sole legal owner of this property, as confirmed by Washoe County Public Records, is Mr. Stellan Voss." He looked up. "Thank you. Enjoy your evening." 50 people heard every word. I watched Claudia's face from across the table. The color drained from it so completely and so quickly that I thought for a moment she might reach for the back of her chair. Beckett went very still beside her, his fork suspended halfway to his plate, his jaw locked. Then Claudia straightened. She reached into the leather portfolio beside her setting and withdrew a document. The quitclaim deed formatted correctly my name on the signature line, and she looked directly at me with a smile that cost her everything to maintain. "Dad," she said, and her voice was smooth and warm and absolutely controlled. "While everyone is here and since this house means so much to our family, I thought tonight would be a meaningful time to formalize something we've discussed. It's just a property transfer, a family matter." She slid the document across the table toward me. "All it needs is your signature." Every head in the room turned toward me. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I reached into the breast pocket of my jacket and withdrew two things: a folded copy of the original property deed, my name dated 1998, witnessed and notarized, and a printed copy of an email. I set both on the table in front of me, smoothed them flat with one hand, and looked up at my daughter. "I know what it needs," I said. "But before I sign anything in this room, I think 50 people deserve to understand what they're witnessing." Claudia's smile flickered. "Dad, this really isn't this deed," I said, and my voice was steady and deliberate, carrying the same way Conrad's has my name on it. It has had my name on it for 27 years. I have paid the property taxes on this house every single year. I have maintained the insurance. I have replaced the roof twice." I paused. "No one else has contributed $1 to this property." Beckett's chair scraped back from the table. "Stellan, I think we should take this." "We're already here," I said. I looked at him directly, and I felt something cold and clear moving through me. Not anger exactly, but its quieter, more permanent cousin. "Sit down, Beckett." He sat. He sat because 50 people were watching, and because somewhere in the architecture of his desperation, he understood that standing would make everything worse. I picked up the printed email. This was sent to me on December 10th from an anonymous account. It contains a transcript of a conversation between my daughter and my son-in-law, detailing a plan to file a guardianship petition the morning after this dinner using my signature tonight as evidence of my lucidity, while simultaneously arguing in court that I suffer from cognitive inconsistencies. I set the email down. I want everyone in this room to understand what that means. It means the plan was to use this party as a legal instrument to have me declared incompetent and seize control of my assets, including a $48 million investment fund. The room made a sound, not words, just the collective intake of breath from 50 people recalibrating everything they thought they knew about this evening. Lorraine made a sound that was not a breath. It was sharp and broken somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes gone wide and wet. She looked at Claudia, and what moved across her face was not surprise. It was the expression of someone watching the thing they built collapse in real time. Claudia's composure cracked. "Dad, you don't understand what you're—" "I understand exactly." My voice did not waver, but my chest was burning. This was my daughter. This was the girl I had carried on my shoulders in the shallows of this lake 30 years ago. This was the person Nora had loved, even while she was afraid of her. The pain of that did not leave it sat in me like a stone, and I carried it and kept speaking. "Silas." Silas Merritt rose from his seat at the end of the table. He opened the dark green folder, withdrew 3 documents, and crossed the room with the measured pace of a man who had been waiting 3 years for this moment. He placed one document in front of Claudia, one in front of Beckett, and one in front of Lorraine. "These are legal notices," Silas said, confirming the existence and terms of an irrevocable trust established by Nora Voss 8 years ago and amended to irrevocable status 3 years ago. Under the terms of that trust, Claudia Voss Hargrove is entirely excluded from all distributions and succession rights. The trust assets, including this property, Voss Capital Management shares, and all associated accounts, are held for the benefit of Declan Hargrove and his sister to be distributed at age 25. He closed the folder. The quitclaim deed before you this evening is void on its face, as the property is already held in trust and cannot be transferred by signature alone. Claudia stared at the document in front of her. Her hands were flat on the table, pressing down hard, and I could see the tremor moving through them, small, rapid, uncontrollable. Her face had gone past pale into something gray and hollow. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were bright and furious and devastated all at once. "Mom did this, she said. Her voice broke on the last word, not with grief, but with the particular anguish of someone realizing the person they underestimated was always 3 steps ahead. "Yes," I said, "she did." Beckett pushed back from the table and walked toward the hallway. Without a word, his footsteps heavy and fast, the sound of a man who understood that the number he'd been counting on for 2 years had just disappeared. I heard the front door open. I did not turn around. Declan was sitting at the far end of the table, his hands clasped in front of him, his eyes bright with something that was not tears, but was very close to them. When our eyes met, I gave him one slow nod. He pressed his lips together and nodded back, and his whole body seemed to exhale 2 months of fear, leaving him at once. "Who sent the email?" Claudia demanded, her voice climbing, now raw and unraveling. "Who sent you that email?" I folded the printed copy and put it back in my pocket. "Someone who loves this family more than you gave them credit for," I said. I looked at my daughter, really looked past the red dress and the calculated smile and the 2 years of careful planning, and what I felt was not triumph. It was exhaustion and grief and the particular sadness of a man who had hoped even at the end to be wrong. "Claudia, your mother knew. She knew everything, and she still chose to protect you by giving you time to become someone different." My voice dropped. "You didn't use it." Claudia's chin trembled. Her eyes filled, spilling over before she could stop them, 2 tears tracking down through her careful makeup. She opened her mouth, and for a moment I thought she might say something real. Something beneath all of it, something that was actually her. But then she closed it, pressed her lips together, picked up her portfolio, and walked out of the room. The door at the end of the hall clicked shut. 50 people sat very still around 3 tables covered in white linen and winter greenery, the beef tenderloin cooling in the kitchen, the candles still burning, the crystal still catching the light. Conrad appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiped his hands on his cloth, and said with absolute calm, "Shall I serve the first course?" I exhaled for what felt like the first time in 2 hours. "Please," I said. "Thank you, Conrad." He nodded once and disappeared back into the kitchen. Conrad served the first course at 8 o'clock, and the 50 guests ate. They ate carefully, the way people eat after witnessing something that has permanently rearranged their understanding of a family they thought they knew. Conversations started and stopped. Forks touched plates. Someone near the far end of the table asked their neighbor to pass the bread, and the ordinary sound of it, the small human normalcy of it, made my chest loosen by half an inch. I picked up my own fork and ate, because Nora had always said that the best thing a person can do after a hard thing is to continue being alive in the most literal sense possible. Declan appeared at my elbow before the second course. He was still in his too large blazer, his tie slightly crooked, his eyes red at the corners from the effort of holding himself together for 2 hours in a room full of people who had no idea what he had done to make this evening possible. He stood beside my chair and said very quietly, "Grandpa, are you okay?" I pushed back my chair, stood up, and put both arms around him. He made a sound against my shoulder, something that had been compressed into a very small space for a very long time, suddenly finding room to exist. His hands gripped the back of my jacket, and his shoulders shook once, twice, and then he pulled in a long, ragged breath and held on. I held on too. My eyes were burning, my throat was tight, and I did not try to stop any of it. 16 years old. He had carried this for 2 months, completely alone, and he had not broken, and he had not looked away, and he had sent 13 words to an anonymous email address, and trusted that his grandfather would understand them. "Thank you," I said into his shoulder. My voice came out broken, and I did not try to fix it. "You were braver than anyone in this room tonight." He pulled back enough to look at my face. His eyes were wet, and his jaw was trembling slightly, and he looked very young and very old, at the same time the way a person looks when they've done something that cost them something real. "I was scared the whole time," he said. "That's what brave is," I said. He almost smiled. It was a small, exhausted, real thing, the kind of smile that has nothing performed in it, and it was the most beautiful thing I had seen in a very long time. Silas came to find me near the end of the evening, when the guests had thinned and the catering team had begun quietly clearing tables. He sat in the chair beside mine and set the dark green folder on the table between us. "It's done," he said. "I'll file the notices Monday. The guardianship petition, if it was ever formally drafted, is moot now. The trust is airtight." He paused. "Nora's instructions were carried out exactly as she intended." 8 years, I said. 8 years. Silas turned to look at me directly. "She came to me the summer after Claudia's engagement. She said, 'Silas, I need you to build something that doesn't depend on Stellan knowing to fight back. Something that fights for him whether he's ready or not.'" He stopped. "That's what File 24 was. It was her fighting for you from a distance." The burning came back to my eyes, sharp and sudden. I pressed my fingers against the bridge of my nose and breathed slowly. Outside the tall windows, the lake was dark under a clear sky full of stars, and the Christmas lights along the shoreline were reflected in it. A second sky beneath the water, quiet and inverted and still. "Is she gone?" I asked, meaning Claudia. "She and Beckett left before 8, Silas said. "Lorraine went shortly after. I don't know where any of them went." He folded his hands on the table. "What do you need from me now?" "Nothing tonight," I said. "Monday, whatever the process requires. I'll handle it." I shook his hand, thanked Conrad at the door. Conrad, who gripped my hand with both of his, and said, "Nora would have loved tonight, and meant it with every word, and drove back to Truckee alone." The cabin was dark when I arrived. I turned on the lamp over the fireplace, sat down in the chair I always sat in, and looked at the cedar box on the shelf. The fire was not lit. The house was very quiet. I did not feel the need to fill the quiet with anything. A week later, on the last day of December, Declan knocked on the cabin door. He was in jeans and a heavy coat, carrying a paper bag that turned out to contain 2 sandwiches and a thermos of coffee, and he said, when I opened the door, "I thought you might want company." I stepped back and let him in. He sat in the chair across from mine, unwrapped both sandwiches, handed me one, and poured the coffee. We ate together in the warm room, the fire going now, the snow coming down outside the window in slow, deliberate flakes. "What happens to them?" he asked after a while. "Meaning his parents, meaning Lorraine." "That's not for me to decide," I said. "The legal process will take its course. Beyond that, what they do is their own." He nodded slowly, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Are you going to be okay? Alone, I mean." I looked around the cabin. The cedar box, the lamp, the chair Nora had recovered in blue fabric, the year before she got sick, the window with the mountain visible through the glass, even in winter, the whole small world she had helped me build and had spent 8 years quietly protecting. "I have everything I need," I said. She made sure of that. Declan looked at me for a moment with those serious, too old eyes, and then he looked at the fire. "She sounds like she was something else," he said. She was the best thing that ever happened to me, I said. And she knew me well enough to know I'd need a little help saying goodbye to what I thought my family was. I paused. You helped with that too. He looked down at his sandwich. His ears went red at the tips the way teenagers do when they've been told something they don't know how to carry yet. I just sent an email, he said quietly. You sent it to the right person, I said. That's not nothing. We finished our sandwiches. We finished the coffee. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the pine boughs, the cabin roof, the long driveway. The whole mountain in something clean and white and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened in the past 3 weeks. The new year was one day away. Nora had once told me that the difference between people who survive hard things and people who don't is not strength. It is preparation. It is the willingness to look at what is coming clearly enough and early enough to build something that holds. She had looked. She had built. And when the moment arrived, 69 years old and standing in a room full of people who thought they knew how the evening would end, I had been ready. Not because I was strong enough, because she had been wise enough, that I decided as the fire burned low and Declan fell asleep in the chair across from mine, with his coffee cup still warm in his hand, was the most complete act of love I had ever witnessed. I covered him with the blanket from the arm of the sofa. I sat back down. I looked at the cedar box, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I smiled. I am not a wise man by nature. I am simply an old man who was loved wisely by someone wiser than himself. If there is one thing this family story taught me, it is that love without preparation is just a wish. Nora did not leave me a letter telling me she loved me. She left me 47 pages of legal documentation and a video recorded in a lawyer's office. That to me is what love looks like when it is serious. I used to believe that keeping quiet was the same as keeping peace. I was wrong. Silence is not peace, it is just postponed pain. If I could go back and speak sooner, set boundaries earlier, protect what mattered before it was nearly taken, I would. So I say this plainly, do not be like me. Do not wait until someone is already at your table with a pen in their hand, before you decide your life is worth defending. I am not a religious man, in the way some people are. But standing in that cabin on the last night of December, watching snow fall, and my grandson breathe quietly in the chair across from mine, I whispered a thank you to Nora, and to God for giving me enough time to get it right. These grandpa stories are not about victory. They are about what we owe the people who trust us, our children, our grandchildren, ourselves. Every grandpa story's worth telling comes down to one question. When the moment arrived, were you ready? Every family story begins long before the crisis, and every family story is still being written even now, even yours. If something in this family story stayed with you a moment, a line, a feeling you recognized, leave it in the comments. Your words remind me that these stories matter beyond this room. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't yet, subscribe because the next chapter is already waiting. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. And a gentle note, before we continue, the stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted entirely for reflection and meaning. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for right now, no hard feelings, step away, find what serves you, and come back whenever you are ready. For those staying, I am glad you are here.